The Evil Dead films are some of my favourite films of all time, so when a viewer requested the first one, I jumped at the chance and said, I'll go two better and review the entire original trilogy. First up, The Evil Dead, which is a 1981 supernatural horror film written and directed by Sam Raimi. The background of this film is quite interesting, seeing as Raimi was only 20 when shooting began and made it entirely off his own back, independently from any major studio, going on to springboard him into a long and successful career as a director and producer. So let's first take a look at just how The Evil Dead came into being. Raimi and the star of the film, Bruce Campbell, had actually known each other from an early age and had made short, low-budget Super 8 films together many times. They had both come to the conclusion that they'd like to pursue a career in horror. With this in mind, they made a prototype short film shot for just $1,600 called Within the Woods, made with the express purpose of attracting funds to shoot a feature-length horror film. Although it was unsuccessful in attracting studio funding, they did eventually scrounge together enough funds from various sources to go ahead with the shoot. With the film going into production, Raimi asked various friends and prior collaborators to help make the film, which they agreed to do, including Bruce Campbell, who agreed to co-produce it along with Robert Tappert, meaning he'd be the only actor willing to stick around for the entire shoot, so was also given the lead role of Ash Williams as a result. Other cast members came from an advertisement in the Detroit News that attracted the attention of Betsy Baker as Linda and Ellen Sandweiss, who starred in Within the Woods, also signing on. The rest of the cast and crew were essentially Raimi and Campbell's friends or family, with Tom Sullivan, who had provided makeup and effects for Within the Woods, also returning for the shoot. Principal photography took place within a remote cabin in Tennessee, with the cast and crew having to sleep in the cabin during the night. This led to various arguments between the cast and crew due to the difficult living conditions. Which brings us to the film's release. It received largely positive reviews and grossed either $2.7 million or $29.4 million, depending on what sources you use, at the box office, which either way isn't bad on a budget of $375,000. As for me, I think The Evil Dead is low budget filmmaking at its very best. So let's take a look at exactly why that is. Firstly, the plot is simple. It merely exists to set up and pay off fun. 5 Michigan State University students head to a remote cabin where they discover an audio tape and book. When played, the audio tape unleashes demons that possesses 4 of the teens and attack the 5th, Ash Williams, in increasingly crazed and gory ways until he ultimately defeats them. Ash Williams, according to his driver's license, was 25 in 1982 during the events of the movies, so he was an old university student, which kind of plays into his character in this first film, but more on that later. Secondly, it's a one-location flick that uses and utilizes that location to its very maximum. There is literally just one location throughout the 85-minute runtime of Evil Dead, but it never feels that way due to a really clever use of lighting smoke and using the one place as various locations to maximum effect. So we get the cabin with the woods all shot within the cabin and its locales, with the basement being shot at a farmhouse and in Sam Raimi's garage, as the cabin didn't actually have a basement. These give the film an interesting and varied look, even though it essentially all takes place within a few hundred meters of the cabin in the woods. This is really enhanced by the exceptional camera work, camera movement, and framing of scenes, which creates tension and a really creepy vibe through a lot of innovative techniques, which were basically a result of necessity, as they didn't have the equipment to shoot them traditionally. For instance, instead of using a Steadicam, they invented the shaky cam, which was essentially a camera strapped to a piece of wood with 2 cameramen holding it and then running through the woods. The iconic final shot of the film was a camera mounted to a bike, then driven through the forest and the cabin to create the seamless long take necessary for the shot. This style of direction and camera work has actually gone on to be a distinctive feature throughout Raimi's career. Thirdly, it's a love letter to all things gory, camp and horror. Anyone who has ever seen one of my prior reviews will know that I love all things camp, gory and horrific, and it is obvious to anyone who has a love of those things that so does Sam Raimi. He attacks the oeuvre of gore with just absolute abandoned glee, oblivious to such things as censorship and ratings. You name it, this film has it. People chopped to pieces by an axe, gruesome close-ups, overacting stop motion, melting corpses, trees raping a woman. In fact, if you made a checklist of things you'd want in a camp 80s horror, Evil Dead would have 90% of them, if not more. Added to this, the makeup and effects are mind-blowingly good for a movie of this budget. The Deadites look disgusting, and there's a whole bucket load of glorious gore and clever use of camera trickery to create effects that still stand up even now. I'll be honest, I'll take these stop motion or reverse footage vines over perfectly filmed CGI ones any day. Yeah, they look kinda goofy, but the fact they move in such an odd and kind of weird way adds to rather than subtracts from the creepy vibe the film is going for. This scene apparently didn't start out as a rape scene. In the original script it was merely described as Cheryl gets attacked by the woods. It just kept getting added to until, well, it turned into what we got. A scene that is still shocking even when you've seen it multiple times. Fourthly, it's also darkly comedic, not as overtly comedic as the two sequels which follow, but still darkly comedic in a strange way. Maybe that's just me, who finds these kinds of things hilarious, I don't know. Also, it introduced the world to Bruce Campbell, and that has got to be a good thing because he's in some amazing films. He's still working, and if I see his name attached to a project, my interest is instantly piqued. He's still not quite the wisecracking and arrogant full-fat Ash Williams my brain remembers and loves in this first outing, but he's still damned good, even if he's a little bit more of a laid-back everyman who shows a little bit of cowardice even. All in all, The Evil Dead is everything good about low-budget horror in one neat little 85-minute package that absolutely has passed the test of time to become, in my opinion, one of the ultimate cult movies of all time. Which brings us to Evil Dead 2, its bigger budgeted sequel. It wasn't more than 10 minutes into my rewatch of Evil Dead 2 that I realised that when I think of Evil Dead, I'm really thinking of Evil Dead 2. It's essentially a bigger budget remake of the original, just everything is more refined. If everything in the original was a 10, here it's an 11. A sequel had actually been discussed whilst making the original. Raimi envisioned a story where Ash was sucked back in time and fought Deadites in the medieval era, but when the studios decided to pass on producing this concept, Raimi went ahead with his Coen brother collaboration Crime Wave. Sadly for Raimi, and happily for anyone who enjoys the Evil Dead franchise, Crime Wave released to a disappointing critical and commercial reception. With his career already looking like it was hitting the rocks, he once again went back to the Evil Dead sequel idea. Originally, Embassy Pictures agreed to finance the picture, but after 5 months pre-production work, they got cold feet and pulled out, meaning the film once again needed finance. Thankfully, Dino De Laurentiis was convinced to fund the film by Stephen King, who had been a huge fan of the original. However, De Laurentiis demanded the film drop the medieval setting and be more like the original, giving Raimi and Tappert a budget of $3.6 million, which was a huge increase on the originals, but not as much as they'd have liked. The film released in 1987 and grossed around $11 million worldwide, which wasn't bad seeing as it only received a limited theatrical release. As for me, I love this movie. It's everything that made the original great, and then a little bit more. Even though it is described by both Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi as a direct sequel to The Evil Dead, I personally have to differ. It certainly isn't a direct sequel in the traditional sense, because it doesn't really follow on from where the original ends. It kind of retreads the same path. We open with a sort of recap that introduces the Necronomicon, which was burnt in the fire at the end of the first film but survives here, somehow with Ash once again played by Campbell taking Linda, his girlfriend this time played by Denise Bixler, to a remote cabin, where he once again finds a recording from an archaeologist who has discovered the Necronomicon and reads it aloud on tape which sets the Deadites free, instantly possessing Linda, and meaning Ash has to once again kill her because he already did that in the first movie, let's not forget. The archaeologist's daughter then turns up with more pages of the Necronomicon, and she and her buddies throw Ash in the cellar, thinking he murdered her parents, where her now possessed mother is buried. We then get 40 more minutes of blood, guts, mayhem, demon possession, and death. Then Ash is sucked back in time to the medieval period. His friends from the original and whether this Linda is even the original Linda are never actually mentioned. Hell, Ash doesn't even seem to mention the events of the first film at any point during this supposed direct sequel, which has every single plot beat of the original basically, even down to a girl being attacked by vines in the forest. Thankfully not sexually violated this time, at least not in the version I own. That's not to say this is a scene for scene remake, because it isn't. There are a number of very important changes made which make this overall an improvement on the already brilliant original. Firstly, the pacing here is tightened up way more than it was in the first film, which took around 20 to 25 minutes to get into the good stuff. Here, the good stuff starts about 5 minutes in and never lets up until the very end. It's just an absolute blast from start to finish, never letting up in its unrelenting silliness and gore. Being so over the top it goes straight through horror and comes out the other side as a winking love letter, made entirely from satire of B-movie horror tropes. And I love it. Secondly, Ash is a totally different character, having a far more goofy, laconic personality, and by the film's end, being more of a hero archetype than he was in the first, where he was much more of an everyman stand-in. Bruce Campbell, who returns to play Ash, is frankly exceptional here. He carries the first maybe 40 or 45 minutes of this film whilst he's at the cabin on his own. He really sells the sense he's going insane as blood, guts and his own arm fly around the screen. I remember Ash being this character far more than I do the Ash from the original. He gets his iconic boomstick and chainsaw combo during this film, and he even utters the immortal line, "groovy," about an hour in. He's also hilarious, which brings me to my next point. That being, this is much more of a conventional horror comedy than the first, which had comedic elements, but not as intentional as this one is. A very tight, entertaining 85 minutes, but a far less serious, a lot more goofy, and fun ride than the original. At times laugh out loud funny, if you find that kind of thing hilarious, which of course I do, because look at the kind of movies I review. I love me some horror comedy, and Evil Dead 2 is one of the best examples of that genre going, I think. The other really big noticeable change is the budget and the confidence with which Raimi executes his ideas. Now, the original Evil Dead had some absolutely magnificent camera work, practical effects, and ideas for the budget. Here, all of those are in attendance, but just done way better. For anyone who likes practical effects and the use of camera movement, then this film is an absolute treat. It's like a who's who of practical effects. You get models, matte paintings, miniatures, composites, and people in latex foam rubber suits. They all absolutely hold up 35 years later and look way better than anything the first film had. We also get gallons of fake blood, which comes in a whole variety of colours in an attempt to get an R rating, but that was never going to happen without extensive cuts that would have left the film being both really short and really boring. This caused a little problem, as De Laurentiis couldn't release an X-rated film under his own name. So he created Rosebud, the film production company supposedly responsible for the release of this film. It wasn't actually a real production company, it was just a shell run by his son-in-law, which allowed him to pseudonymously release the film. So that was Evil Dead 2, a somewhat remake or even maybe a direct sequel depending on who you decide to believe. But either way, in my honest opinion, a film that is better in every way than the original, which is itself an absolute stone cold classic. And the original idea of having Ash go back in time, well, that became Evil Dead 3, otherwise known as Army of Darkness. Would it be sacrilegious for me to suggest that on rewatching Army of Darkness after many years, and probably for the first time sober and not in a group of other inebriated friends, that I didn't enjoy this anywhere near as much as the first two films in the trilogy? Much like Day of the Dead I reviewed a few weeks ago, It's still a good film, just not on the same level as the two prior films in the series. For a reason why I'll get to in a minute, but first the background. There had been plans to make a third Evil Dead film for a number of years due to the financial success of the first two in the series, with De Laurentiis once again being willing to fund it. However, he was only willing to front up $8 million, and it was pretty obvious with the much larger scope of the script, this wasn't going to be anywhere near enough. So he approached Universal Studios, who he had a multi-picture deal with, and they agreed to fund half of a $12 million budget due to the fact that Raimi had just worked with them on Darkman, and that was a small financial success. A film that I previously reviewed last year, so go check that out, because I described studio meddling in that video, and spoiler alert, I'm just about to do that again. After the film had been shot and was in pre-production, Universal once again, much like they did with Darkman, stepped in and started messing with Raimi's vision. This time they forced him to change the ending as they didn't like the downbeat nihilistic original, preferring a more upbeat one, preventing him from calling the film Medieval Dead or Evil Dead: The Army of Darkness, preferring it to be a standalone film just called Army of Darkness. I have to now go off on a little tangential rant. This is one of the dumbest things I have ever heard, and kind of proves that studio executives are in fact idiots who do not know a single thing about the industry they work in. Oh look, we have a third film in a hugely popular cult franchise. Let's distance our film from the previous successful and hugely popular films for reasons only we are coked up enough to comprehend, because that will equal box office gold. Or not, as the case probably turns out to be. Oh, they also threw a hissy fit due to an unrelated argument with De Laurentiis over the rights to Hannibal Lecter, and pushed the release date back from the summer of 92 to February 93. Then put in independent editors in an attempt to edit the film down into a PG-13 from an R, which failed miserably because the MPAA kept refusing to give it anything but an R rating. This has led to the film having multiple versions, at least 4, that I'm aware of. I watched the 81-minute theatrical cut for this rewatch. Speaking of which, let's get into the review, because yeah, I still enjoy Army of Darkness, but it's like a hamburger to me. I really enjoy hamburgers, but I'd much rather be eating a nice juicy steak, and Army of Darkness is like that. I'm watching Army of Darkness, but I'm thinking of Evil Dead 2 the whole time I'm doing it for various reasons. Firstly, the plot is bigger, but I've said before, bigger doesn't always mean better, and I think that's the case here. Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 have really tight focused narratives set in one location, and that one location is essentially a character in of itself almost. By expanding the focus and breadth of the plot in Army of Darkness, we lose a lot of that tight narrative, all of the location being a character, and almost all of the atmosphere those films had as a result. We start exactly where we left off at the end of Evil Dead 2, with Ash being transported back in time to the 1300s. Except we kind of don't, because of the end of Evil Dead 2 he's lauded as the saviour straight away. Here, he's being whipped and chained, and is in fact thrown in a pit of deadites, and he's only lauded as the chosen one, when he in fact kills one. Other changes are made from Evil Dead 2, including his girlfriend Linda, who makes another appearance in this opening, played by a third different actress, this time Bridget Fonda. She once again gets instantly possessed and disappears from the movie in what is a shot-for-shot remake of scenes from Evil Dead 2, which they apparently had to reshoot due to rights issues instead of just reusing the old footage. They also attempted to reshoot Ash and his Oldsmobile falling from the sky as well, but there was an accident and the crane holding the Oldsmobile fell into a gravel pit, and they ended up just reusing the old footage anyway. Ash then has to travel to a mysterious and foreboding cemetery to retrieve the Necronomicon, and he has to utter 3 words whilst he picks up the book, and if he doesn't, something terrible will happen. Yada yada yada, he isn't listening, forgets one of the words, and something terrible happens. that being an army of darkness rising from their graves and attacking the castle, where Ash has to once again save the day and defeat the Deadites before returning back to his own time. There are clearly obvious influences on the plot, such as Gulliver's Travels, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and a bunch of Ray Harryhausen films, and it's entertaining enough. It's just nowhere near as tight and well paced as the prior flicks. It starts out fairly slow and gets better as the film progresses, with the attack by the eponymous Army of Darkness at the end being the best sequence on show, also due to the studio meddling and attempts to get a PG-13 rating. The crowd-pleasing elements of gore and the gonzo, almost parody levels of violence that fueled a lot of the entertainment value in the prior films are largely gone, or very toned down here. It's in the main a very bloodless and goreless affair, with most of the deaths being pretty obvious lifeless plaster-cast skeletons being destroyed. It's entertaining enough, but not quite Ash cutting his own arm off levels of entertainment. Added to that are the special effects. They often say that necessity is the mother of invention, and that could well be very true in the case of the first two films in this trilogy, with a lot of unique camera angles, framing and techniques coming about because they had no money and had to come up with a low-tech, low-cost solution. Here they had money, and it looks worse. Whilst watching the film, I felt like it was the compositing of what I assumed were green screen elements in the background and live actors in the foreground that were just slightly off. But after doing a bit of research, I discovered they used a front projection technique called intravision, where the background elements are projected onto a screen, and the actor can then seem to interact and react to that. There's something just not right about the lighting of the backgrounds in contrast to the real elements in the version I watched, which makes it super obvious it's two separate elements. Maybe it's a result of watching this on a 4K TV when it was made at a time when people were watching on super low resolution VHS and analog TVs, and those hid a whole load of special effects sins with their low res muddy colouring. It is a shame because once again this film uses a wide variety of traditional practical effects to bring the Army of Darkness and Deadites to life, and they do largely still hold up. I'll still take this over a CGI horde of skeletons any day. Another reason I don't enjoy this as much is the humour falls much flatter for me than it does in the prior outings. I maybe chuckled once or twice, whereas I laugh out loud at both Evil Deads. It certainly isn't all bad. Ash is once again played by Bruce Campbell, brilliantly as always. The character is also much more of the sarcastic asshole we all know and love too. Embeth Davids, in her first feature film appearance, is a welcome addition to the cast as Sheila, Ash's somewhat love interest come Deadite Queen later on in the proceeding. It's kind of a shame she hated shooting the film so much she apparently contemplated quitting acting after this. Thankfully she didn't, and neither did the Evil Dead series, because it returned with a remake in 2013 which I only recently just watched. I didn't enjoy it anywhere near enough to rewatch it so soon after so I could review it as part of this video, so yeah, take that for what you will. There's also a great TV series called Ash vs the Evil Dead which aired on Starz for 3 seasons from 2015 to around 2018, and from what I saw of it, that was great television. Admittedly, I never finished all 3 seasons, and again I didn't want to watch 15 hours of TV for this review, but it's well worth a watch. So that was the Evil Dead Trilogy, a series of films I have loved for as long as I can remember, and I'm happy to say largely hold up even now, especially the first 2 in the series, which are stone cold classics as far as I'm concerned.